We're going to start recording. So far, what we've talked about is the rituals that we have celebrated at the beginning of life. And we've talked about learning and sanctifying learning. And now we're moving into the stage in which we celebrate um, the power of relationships, the power of commitment, and the not only the sort of ancient promises that sanctified that power, but also in our second week we'll be talking a lot about how something that seems to we want it to be so fixed and finite must naturally evolve, as does the quality of the relationships that we come together to sanctify. And I think that push and pull of like being in tradition and embracing change could not be more uh, evident in the life cycle rituals around marriage, around partnering, and especially when we talk about 20th century partnerships, whether it's for same-sex relationships, whether it's second marriages, anniversaries, whether it's interfaith relationships. How does Judaism continue to speak about that is something that is going to be our focus for the coming weeks. I really enjoyed our last week's conversation because we were talking a lot about we talked a lot about like gender identity and identity as a question of education. And I thought that that was a really important thing for us to bring into focus when we're talking about this. And I don't think that it's going to diminish. Our conversation is going to diminish that subject as we move forward, especially because it's still a new and a very important part of Jewish ritual. Is how do we continue to make space for as many varieties as are possible. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to really focus on kind of how did the rituals around marriage come into being from the Jewish tradition, and then we'll save a little bit of time towards the end to talk about some of the varieties if we get there. Okay, any comments, any responses to that as we get started? Fantastic. Well, let's just jump right into it. Okay. Can everybody see this well? Okay, let me see if I can. Yes, can I get a here? Oops. There we go.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm also trying to manipulate all of my screens and getting there as much as possible. Okay, so so let's take a look at this. This is just a very important part about the Jewish wedding ceremony. We're going to get into the specifics, but this is just a sort of overall wedding ceremony and something that's kind of unique and interesting about it. Jeannie, oops, I got you as you're coughing. Judy, would you like to read for us the beginning of the ceremony? Like, what is the ceremony of weddings? Can you read that for us?
Until late in the Middle Ages, marriage consisted of two ceremonies that were marked by celebrations at two separate times, with an interval in between. First came the betrothal, the irusin, and later the wedding, nisuin. At the betrothal, the woman was legally married, although she still remained in her father's house. She could not belong to another man unless she was divorced from her betrothed. The wedding meant only that the betrothed woman, accompanied by a colorful procession, was brought from her father's house to the house of her groom, and the legal tie with him was consummated. This division of marriage into two separate events originated in very ancient times, when marriage was a purchase, both in its outward form and in its inner meaning. Woman was not recognized as a person, but was bought in marriage like chattel. Marriage, as with any type of purchase, consisted of two acts. First, the price was paid and an agreement reached on the conditions of sale. Sometime later, the purchaser took possession of the object. In marriage, the mohar was paid and a detailed agreement reached between the families of the bride and groom. This betrothal was followed by the wedding, when the bride was brought into the home of the groom, who took actual possession of her. In those days, the betrothal was the more important of these two events and maintained its importance as long as marriage was actually based upon a purchase. But as women assumed more importance as individuals, and marriage ceased to be a purchase, attaining moral significance. The actual wedding became more important than the betrothal.
Okay. So if anybody's blood was boiling like mine, we're gonna go find some ice and try to, cool ourselves down. But the reason that I brought it up is not to say, so that's the way it should be, right? But it's actually quite the other way, right? Which is to say this is the sort of foundation. And the fact that we have to study the evolution of it is not just simply about the act of the ceremony itself, but it really does form a foundation of sort of the nature of equality. It's why it's such an important thing for us to demonstrate symbolically how we feel about the sort of relevance and value of each other as individuals. And I got to tell you, as we go into the second session and we talk about same-sex partners and we talk about interfaith partners, there's something really important about how do we validate the sort of mutuality of the experience, that knowing that historically it was founded upon a little bit of this sort of like patriarchy, one-sidedness, acquisition, purchasing, that kind of stuff. Sue, Casa, go for it.
Just a quick question. The purchase agreement, was that negotiated at the betrothal, or was it between the betrothal and the nisuim?
Yeah, so exactly, like it was absolutely a contract purchase. Imagine that the sort of like fathers would meet, typically in like some communal space. They would negotiate the terms. Okay, they would have an agreement, and then they would bring the ketubah to the groom and the bride. And that's why there is, as we get into the ceremony, there's symbolic gestures that we continue to carry on, which or we carry forward into our time with a sense of that like agreement that took place back in ancient times. Now it's almost like it's a relic, right? It's a relic for us today, but it has different valence. Okay. Any other comments? Great question. Okay. Good. So like I said, I think we're feeling like this gives us a sense of, there's a couple things that I wanted to bring here. One, that the ceremony that we're going to be discussing used to be two ceremonies. Okay, and when couples were partnered together, one was transactional. Just think about this, right? It's a prenup, right? Like, and there's significant documentation of prenuptial agreements. They're called tenayim in Hebrew. I'm going to write that word in the chat just so you can see it. I didn't talk about it because it's not not in common practice. It is around in practice, but it's kind of like a promise to get married. And what a lot of couples do is they just sort of like add it into the ceremony. That happens all in the day. It's sort of like a kitchen sink of ceremonies as opposed to these two events. The other thing that at least this article, by the way, from a very reputable historian, is he said that the latter part, the kind of like the celebration of the presentation of the bride to the community, that we associate with a wedding ceremony, with the dress and with the chuppah and all that other stuff, that actually took more prominence throughout time, maybe because already the contractual obligations seem to have less significance. But the fact that at the very foundation, we're talking about a contractual commitment is really powerful. Why do people make contracts with each other? Let's just play around with that for a second.
Hold each other accountable. I mean, each has to do the stipulations or live by the stipulations in the contract.
So take a little step further, right? So we make commitments to hold each other accountable. Why? Why do we hold each other accountable? Who wants to take a stab at that one? Because I got to tell you, for those of you who are partnered up, go back and find your romantic one and be like, I'm accountable to you. And it's actually kind of, it could be romantic. I mean, in my house, it's more like a punch on the arm, but it's okay. We do have romance about it. Sue, what do you want to say?
I was going to say that usually in the Torah, Hebrew Bible, things that they mention, like thou shalt not commit adultery, means that those things were going on. So this would be the same thing, that mates were not treating their partners kindly. And I think that in some ways you could say that the ketubah was a protection for a woman, so that she became more than the property. She was technically the property of the man, but he had responsibilities. And if he didn't fulfill them in the ketubah, then he was that she could break the marriage. So I think that, I think it means that there were many people who were not subscribing to the agreement in the contract.
That's a great comment, right? So part of it, and when we get to sort of like, the bigger question, because I think you sort of also alluded to the bigger question. But part of like built into the mitzvot, the commandments, is this sense that those were behaviors that were present, and the agreements are there to prevent them because of their harm, right? Like committing murder, let's just be, like, so look, murder happens, right? But like committing murder becomes wrong because of the sort of like outcome of it, the consequences of it. So there's a need to adjudicate, there's a need to create a law around it in order to protect it. And that's what you're saying, that ultimately it's about protection. So the ketubah exists, or this sense of accountability exists for protection's sake, not just simply to acquire the woman, that she's a piece of chattel, she's a piece of property, but it's protective. That's nice. And Joanne.
I started my career as a ketubah artist and have been doing ketubot now for 40 years. And some of the research that I've done has shown, that it was actually a very progressive document for its time. And one of the things that's been interesting to me over the last few decades is to watch the evolution of the text. I did the first interfaith text in America, and now there are so many different types of texts where the couple is promising and committing to different types of relationships, that the whole thing is fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, with a very like sweet humility, the fact that you wrote the first interfaith text is pretty darn significant. So we're in the presence of, of a person with creativity and foresight, to recognize that there is something more transcendent that is taking place than simply the sort of contractual obligations that exist between men and women, which may have been the sort of structure of relationships in ancient Israel, but now in modernity, where we have multiple relationships that we have come to identify that are valuable, they're worthy of validation, then we need text to be a reflection of that. Okay, that's a really good comment. Thank you for adding that. Marlene, or Candy, Tracy, Marlene. Okay.
I have a question. When did the ketubah start? When did it begin? When the origin of it?
That's a very good point. So very quickly, the best understanding is that the ketubah is a rabbinic document. We have record of it emerging from the rabbinic period. So it's probably as early, it was codified. It was written into books around 200 of the Common Era. So we're about 2,000 years. Okay. So just give it 2,000 years and you're pretty good. Maureen, then Tracy.
Marlene, you mean?
I'm sorry. What did I say?
Maureen.
Oh God.
It's okay.
So sorry.
No problem. My comment was really, it's an interesting comment to me. When I was married, I was just turning 20. And so in terms of accountability or anything that's written in the ketubah, it was so far beyond my capability of understanding what it meant, that it's almost like it's really important to continue to review that over the years as you become older and have more wisdom. I think now, when you say being accountable to someone, I have a whole different framework of what that means. I just wanted to add that.
That's a wonderful comment. That's a wonderful comment. And it really is an important piece. So let me sort of like throw that back together, right? It's progressive, it's about accountability, and also it if it's done correctly, it does, and it should have space to be reinterpreted with a maturity that we acquire. Meaning that, like, as we age, we read the text and our understanding of the text sweetens or becomes deeper. Those commitments deepen, right? I mean, that's the power of relationships. So one thing that is important to sort of hold on to, and Sue was kind of alluding to it from a different aspect of it, is in the sense that, like, talking about, committing adultery, right? And it's a protection. The reason that those rules come into this thing called the Torah is because we're also trying to create a relationship with what we identify as God. That somehow the partnership is a partnership of, it is a sacred union. It's not just about the two bodies coming together, and it's not just about two human beings, but that there is something sacred in the encounter that can emerge. And so this is an opportunity to sort of frame that and to make that holy. In fact, that's the language that we're going to use. It's not special for one person. It's not special just for the other person. It's not special that two people come together. It's that when two people come together and there's a commitment, they have something divine that emerges. That is really the ultimate purpose of this. Now, the language of the text is maybe disconcerting to our sensibilities because we understand what it means to have sacred connections quite differently than our ancestors. But why not? Right? There are so many other things that are just like that. So Tracy, go ahead.
I think it's interesting that, the woman, the wife, the woman, is sort of disempowered in the process, right? I mean, she's treated as chattel, yet the woman, this is a matrilineal heritage. And you talk about the traditional wedding ceremony talks about procreation. So I just kind of think it would be interesting because it almost, you talk about, preventing, the one cheating on the other or the man from adultery. But at the same time, it almost doesn't matter because as long as it's the woman who's, we're assuming Jewish, is going to bear the child or children, then we know we're continuing the lineage. I just think it's kind of interesting. It's like men are using this process to try and gain power they don't have.
Nice. So not only is it about procreation, and if you will, like, where does the power rest? There is power in procreation, not always. I mean, in a cultural world, where women are very much subjugated and are considered to be property, considered to be objects, functions of a masculine patriarchal world, then the role of the women, even if she gives birth to a child, she is disempowered in that respect. So it's very, very, it's a very interesting sort of dynamic. I will say, like, at least in Judaism, but I think in in the modern world, in Judaism, there has been such an evolution, a need to make this a different kind of equality, right? One that is transcendent of even the sort of like the fact that she also owns the ketubah, for example. Okay, that's another thing in ancient Israel, is that she's the one who had the ketubah. So they both signed it, but it's her possession, meaning that, like, she was the one that brought it to the leadership. And even though he had to sort of agree, there's all kinds of layers of complexity to say that there is some power that was given to her. But Tracy, as much as, and you can agree, and I think we all can agree, as much as we want to give a little bit of, I guess, support or qualification to the way that ancient Israelites would sanctify this union, it's still very much imbalanced. And so it's going to take us 1900 years to get it right. Okay, which is unfortunate that it took 1900 years, but we're living in an era, thank God we all live in an era where we're getting it right. It's not quite right, but we're getting it right. All right, let's move on a little bit. unless anybody had a burning comment. And let's go into the ceremony itself. Okay. Now, first, what I want to show you, I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. This is the traditional text of the ketubah. Okay. So it has a date, right, on the big day of the week and all those things. The groom said to the daughter, the groom said to the bride, be my wife according to the statutes of Moses and Israel. Okay. All right. Which is Hare at Mikudeshet li Kedat Moshe Yisrael. Okay, and here's what the groom says: I will work for, esteem, feed, and support you, as is the custom of Jewish men who work for, esteem, feed, and support their wives faithfully. And I will give you this much money, and I will provide you food and clothing and necessities and conjugal rights according to accepted custom. And the bride agreed to become his wife. So basically, he's like, I'm going to pay you for all these things that I'm going to provide for you. And she says, okay. All right. And the dowry, so then also like she brings something, right? She brings from her house, her father's house usually, whether it was silver, gold, jewelry, clothing, furnishing, bedding. The groom accepted responsibility for this much zuzim, right? It's usually 200 zuzim, and agreed to add this to his amount from his own assets to the sum of, it's 100 and 100 equaling 200 zuzim, okay? The groom said the obligation of these 200 zuzim, which, by the way, I always say when I am an officiant at weddings, is roughly to like $4.5 million, right? Like we just say like 200 zuzim, it went through a lot of inflation. It's worth a lot of money today, right? That the additional sum I accept upon myself to be paid from all the best part of my property that I now possess or may hereafter acquire, right? So like you could be a multi-bazillionaire, but if you're giving her the leftovers, that's not good. It's got to be the best. This is blue chip stock, right? What's the Jeff Bezos? What's his wife that she got like half of his stuff? This, anyways, I forgot what her name is, but I think she got a lot of money, right? And so from this day forward, all my property, even the shirt on my back, shall be mortgaged and lien for the payment of this ketubah dowry and additional sum, whether during my lifetime or thereafter. The obligation of this ketubah was accepted by the groom with the strictness established for ketubot and the additional sums for the daughters of Israel, according to the rabbis. This is not to be regarded as a formality or as a perfunctory legal form, meaning that like the ketubah itself is not the value, it's not a valuable instrument. It's a promissory note, right? We've established the acceptance on the part of these people, and all is valid and binding. That is the traditional ketubah text. And Joanne and I saved Joanne. I'm going to call on you because you know that if you did a little bit of study and research, you'll know that the text has transformed significantly. Okay, that this whole concept of value of accountability measured by something that is quantifiable in silver or jewelry, and that there's an imbalance of who owes what and where it comes from, that's all kind of like text that it continues to evolve, because the basic issue, at least of this traditional text, is the groom has certain responsibilities and the bride says yes. You got that? That's how it works. Any comments, questions on that so far? Okay, let's keep on going. Let's get to the juicy stuff. Okay, now this is a wedding ceremony. Okay, the wedding ceremony has two basic elements to it that we talked about, right? That they are, they used to be two separate ceremonies, but now they happen as one. One of the reasons is also expediency. Okay, imagine being married for a year, but living in your father's house, and there would not even be any conjugal rights or visits that were actually expressed at that time. It was simply like a preparation for marriage, right? This is also part of the reason that young girls who were, young would be betrothed at an early age, that they would still live in their father's house because they hadn't yet quite physically nor emotionally matured. So there was this concept of a year's maturity that would help her prepare to be a wife and maybe eventually a mother. And that was the historical part of it. But in the end, we live in a place where, in a time where it wasn't easy to gather Jews together. So they did it all at once. Okay. Now, this is the wedding ceremony that I have here for you. You have the signing of the documents. Kinyan is the Hebrew word for contracts. You sign the ketubah, you sign a state marriage license when you're in the state of California. And then you have this ceremony called bedekin. So let me take off bedekin quickly, take this off the screen. Bedekin literally means checking. Okay, livdok in Hebrew means to check. And it is a part of, it's a custom. So it's not that if you don't do it, that you will not be married. It is a custom that is typically brought into this ceremony. And if you can imagine historically that, grooms and brides were betrothed, and the bride lived in the father's house for a year. And then the first time that they met was at the chuppah. Okay. He didn't get to see her. So like it had to be, there was a verification ceremony, right? That's what this is, a checking, right? And this is actually the bride that he's going to be marrying. And it's hearkening back to biblical times when we talk about the story of Jacob, when he is introduced to his wife Rebecca. She sees him in the field and she lowers a veil out of modesty. And so the veil is a symbol of modesty. And it's a way that the groom then identifies, but also accepts with humility, her modesty, by like checking to make sure that, she also agrees to the nuptials that are about to take place. Okay, so that happens. And also, it's a really beautiful moment. It's only customary. I'm moving through this because I want us to get to the deep part of it and back to our conversation. Okay, so they sign the ketubah, and then they go to this like procession and go to the chuppah. So you have people walking down the aisle, and if anybody's been to a Sephardic or specifically a Persian wedding ceremony, which is now actually having popularity in all kinds of cultural expressions of the Jewish wedding ceremony, you have this like parade down the aisle. It's like a dance party. It's like a fashion show. And sometimes there are like 30 couples. I kid you not. 30 couples that make their way down the aisle, which is, 30 couples at, 20 seconds to 30 seconds each, would be 15 minutes, right? It's a significant amount of time that's a part of the ceremony, okay? Once the couple finally gets down the aisle, then there is a custom of circling. Circling as a custom is basically, it's an Ashkenazi custom. It's not a Sephardic custom. The Sephardim feel that the circling is actually superstitious, that somehow circling somebody is out of suspicion. And so therefore they eliminate it. They don't practice it. But in the Ashkenazic circles, it's very common to have the bride circle the groom. Also potentially superstitious. The idea that, that in this moment, the warding off of evil spirits is something that the bride has the ability to affect. But even more so, if she has never met him before, this is a way for her to see this is really the guy that she marries. And you'll see brides sometimes do that. I don't know how I feel about that terribly. You'll see also the sometimes grooms and brides do they'll do it together, like one partner will do 3 and the other partner will do 3 and they'll do 1 together. I've also heard even recently that one of the partners did 1 circle, like I don't know why, but they did it. I did a wedding recently of a very, very non-traditional family, and they were like, she was circling the groom and she was smiling, and I explained it to them, but like off in the audience was one of the family members going, "Oh, it's Jewish tradition to see that," right? It's like breaking a glass when we get to the glass breaking. It's a tradition that has very little meaning other than you won't see it in other wedding ceremonies. Sukasa asks, who are the couples in the procession? So it can be very detailed. When it's 30, 40 couples, typically it's couples that are not yet partnered, which is sweet, right? Meaning that like, if they get to go down the aisle, that means that maybe they're going to find their intended at the end of the aisle. So to follow the yellow brick road and get to Oz and find their intended partner. And then it's also cousins and family members and the whole party, the bridal party will come down. Okay. There's one more chat. Let me just make sure. Yeah, bridesmaids. Yeah. So there's also bridesmaids is exactly what this is about, right? That's what bridesmaids and groomsmen typically were unmarried, even though now we have a different kind of form of what happens there. All right, everybody's doing okay. I feel like this is a lot of information with not a lot of like meat on it. I just want you to see the ceremony. Okay. So then, in a Jewish wedding ceremony, there's some opening blessings. There's sometimes memorials that are done for loved ones that are gone. And then you have these 2 cups of wine, of which there are 2 very significant blessings that are recited. The first one is called erusin. Erusin means betrothal. These are the blessings that say these are the 2 people that are getting married. There isn't anybody else that is getting married, and the concept of that union is intimacy, right? They're going to experience a level of intimacy unlike any other relationship that they have before. That's physical, that's physical, that's emotional, that is even economic or functional, right? So Sherry, you talked about the Tish. I will come back to that. Thank you for bringing it up. It is a custom, and I'll return back to it. The things that I'm talking about, except yes, it's great. I'll come back to it. Okay, so look at the language of Erusin. It says, "Praised are you, whose presence fills the universe, who sanctifies by your commandments and command us to pursue intimacy through marriage. Blessed is God who sanctifies the people of Israel through the rites of marriage." And they drink some wine that says we are commanded to pursue intimacy. Right? This is like my last question. Why do we sign a ketubah? Because it helps us reaffirm our contract with God. Why do we say this blessing? Because it says that we are commanded to pursue intimacy. Why? Not because it feels good, not because it makes us happy, but because it enables us to understand what God is all about. Isn't that an amazing kind of like way of understanding what this ceremony is all about? The purpose of marriage is not for people to be able to have kids or to have a tax advantage or to be able to go into the hospital rooms. These are all really good things, by the way. But the real reason is not only because you find a sense of like, no, it's not even procreation. I mean, Tracy, like you've got a good question, right? You think it's about procreation. It's not about procreation, especially because what happens if you can't procreate, right? Like, or you don't want to, right? We live in that world. But even back then, it was not contingent upon that. It was all about striving to understand the divine. We find partners in the world because it helps us to become more godly. Okay, so that's what we're doing so far. The next thing that we're going to talk about are the vows. Okay, the vows are also pretty old. They're taken out of rabbinic tradition, and this is one of the legal pieces of the ceremony. We have a ketubah that actually has to happen. The second thing that actually has to happen in order for it to be a Jewish ceremony is some exchange of something of value. Okay, so this is sometimes where a couple will talk to each other, and there is this formula. Look, I put it in transliteration. Hare at mikudeshet li b'taba'at zo ketat Moshe v'Yisrael. By this ring, by this object of value, you are made holy to me. Consecrated means made holy to me as my wife, in accordance with the laws and traditions of Moses and Israel. Now, this is a modern ceremony. Okay, this is from my forms that I give my couples. So obviously, I'm very much in favor of both the groom and the bride, or the groom and the groom, or the bride and the bride, saying these words to each other. The traditional ceremony only has the groom giving the bride an object of value in public. Okay, we read the ketubah. There's a custom of wrapping a talit, a prayer garment, around the couple, because now they are technically married. Okay, they have 2 of the 3. The third one we're going to get to. There's 3 things that you do that are required for marriage. The 2 are the ketubah and the ring, or something of value, and then the third one we'll get to in a moment. But before we do that, we're now going to celebrate their union with these things called Sheva Brachot, 7 wedding blessings. These are the direct translations. So if you look at it, wine, God created everything for God's glory, for creating humanity, that created humanity in God's image. I gotta change this. I'm really realizing that I have some old language here. I don't use this, but his and the traditional language and translation should be much more gender neutral. And then it says, let the barren city, Jerusalem, be jubilantly happy. Okay. And thanks God for making Zion, Jerusalem, the sort of central address of the Jewish people, rejoiced with its children present. Okay. It's not about making children, it's about being in Jerusalem. Okay. Let happiness be attendant upon the couple. And thank you, God, for making the bridegroom and the bride happy. That's the sixth blessing. And then the seventh blessing is let sounds of joy be heard in the world of friendship, of peace, of brother and sisterhood, of pleasure and delight. And may the voices of bridegrooms and brides be heard on high and make the world a little bit more whole. And that's what those seven blessings are about. The rabbi blesses the couple, and then you have a break the glass very quickly, just the end of the ceremony, right? Then you have this sort of like moment of intimacy, yichud, and you have a celebration. And the yichud is the third part of the wedding ceremony. Yichud is an obligation. What is the third obligation? It is about being intimate. It is literally about consummating the marriage. You've heard that word before. But the idea that a bride and a groom, or a bride and a bride, or a groom and groom engage in intimate connection, that is something that is obligated. It is a response. The couple is not married until they have that encounter, according to Jewish law. Okay, which is kind of interesting. And then you're supposed to have a party. Okay, so that was a lot of talking. Let me stop for a second. Tracy asks, in the chat, she says, is infertility grounds for divorce? I would argue no. If you've ever seen, there was a movie, I forgot, it was a really powerful movie. Anybody remember it? Where basically there is in ultra-Orthodox communities, they put a time limit on a couple's marriage, and if they don't conceive a child after 10 years, then they're permitted to divorce. So that is true. It's not that the infertility is the grounds for divorce. There's usually some other kind of like mutual understanding. Look, you could get divorced if you don't like the other person, right? Like that's a truth in Judaism. Okay. And though we're not talking about divorce in our course today, just the concept that exists in the Jewish tradition from the Bible, that's actually pretty powerful itself. Okay. Tracy, in the Feast of Song, where are you sort of like, I mean, I think it's a biblical reference from the prophetic texts that talk about a sense of redemption, a sense of like, messianic redemption, a renewal of the land of Israel as being kind of back in the autonomy of the Jewish people. So that's what it usually refers to, and that there would be celebration there. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, let me go to a Tish. Okay. So is everybody okay? All right. We're gonna go back to one question before we conclude. Okay, because we're trying to figure out this accountability thing, and it's pretty important. Okay. So a Tish literally means a table. Okay. Sherry put in the chat. Tish means table. Have you ever heard tuchus? Often Titian, put your tuchus on the table, right? Like you basically sit down, you're put in your place. Tish equals table, and the idea of it is that before the groom and the bride meet for the first time, when they're signing the ketubah, there is an opportunity for the groom to be distracted from the anxiety that he might feel before signing the ketubah, which is an important document, right? Like imagine signing, for the first home loan that you get, and you realize that you're going to be obligated for, I don't know, $1 million, right? That would be a nice house, by the way, right? Whatever it is, right? You're obligated for a lot of money that you obviously is worth more than you potentially possess, right? You could be very, very nervous about that. So in that moment, because the idea is that by the time that you get to the signing of the ketubah, you know exactly what you're doing. You're ready to make that commitment. that you are distracted with song and with celebration and with well wishes that come from people around the table to sweeten the moment. Sometimes it's associated with a little bit of a little bit of l'chaim, some alcohol, but it's just simply another element of the celebration. Anything to add from anybody else? Did I miss the ceremonies? Okay, so the bigger question is, okay, if this is we identified that like the purpose of the ceremony is to encounter the divine. Okay, so now go back into the ceremony. How do the particular elements of that we just really skimmed through, how do they really elevate the divine? We talked about the ketubah. The ketubah is a sense of a commitment, just like you have the Torah and you follow mitzvot, you have a ketubah you have a Torah for your love. Okay, but just like the blessing over the wine is a commandment to pursue intimacy, because that intimacy with another person enables you to understand the intimacy of your relationship with God. That also that you then make an exchange of something of value to your partner. How is that a connection to God? Can anybody sort of help us figure that piece out? When you give somebody an object of value, how does that help you connect your relationship with God? Somebody want to give a shot at that one? Judy Solomon.
I think it's just a symbol
Of what?
of your connection to God.
So basically, like this is just a symbol of your connection to God. Could this be a symbol of your connection to God?
No, I mean, you're giving a specific symbol.
Yeah. Okay, good. I think that there's the symbol it's a symbolic, unlike a contract, right? I think we could argue that a contract is also a symbol. Unlike sipping some wine, that sipping wine is a symbol. That this object is something symbolic. When else in our lives do we give stuff to God? Tracy, you had your hand up. I don't know if you had something else to add.
Yeah. I mean, when you said, how is it a symbol? Because it's personal sacrifice, right?
Yeah, so go for it. What does that mean?
Well, to come up with something of value, you've had to make some kind of sacrifice, a monetary sacrifice, or something that, that it belongs to you, you're giving up to make that, to buy that ring, let's just say. Oh, here goes the dog again.
It's fantastic. No, that's exactly it, right? So now we don't have sacrifice anymore, right? We don't offer things. We don't have a temple where we offer animals. Some people like that, right? They want to see it happen again. But in the absence of that, what do we do? In the absence of that, we have this moment is a moment in which we make a commitment to something that's greater. We give of ourselves to another person because it's like us giving a sacrifice to God. Now think about that, right? You are making a commitment to another person, and the commitment to another person is like making a commitment to God. Okay. By the way, I wish our friend Maureen, I'm sorry, Maureen is not on here, because Maureen, who grew up Catholic, can tell you very deeply what it means to make a commitment to God with one's sort of entire being. And that's why, in many respects, the Catholic interpretation of this is to become a married to God, right? Like to be in the divine relationship with God. It makes a lot of sense when we read it from this vantage point. So anything else? So let's go. So that's the exchange, right? Now, how about the 7 blessings? How is the 7 blessings also a demonstration of one's intimate connection with God? Do you remember the 7 blessings? They're all about like God is great, and God created humanity, and God's creation of humanity. So creation story, what are you trying to say, Tracy?
I just feel like I'm talking too much. That's why I put it in there. You're creating a new life with 2 lives together as God created the world, right? And on the seventh day, you have a baby. No, I'm just joking. But
No, actually, you're interesting, right? So if God is in the creative act of creating humanity, maybe there's some vestiges of that. Sukasa actually just added such a wonderful thing, right? The round and unbroken nature of the ring is also sort of a similar identification of our relationship to God, and that's a really beautiful comment, and I love that. I'm gonna borrow that next time. I like that. I have other examples that I use for why the ring is, but I like that too with God. So the seven blessings is not only about the sort of like creation process. So just like, think about this, right? You are in union with another human being, which helps you understand your union with the divine, with God, right? And now, just like God is in the process of creation in a 7-day cycle, and there's 7 blessings, so too does the human being participate in that. And what is the ultimate? One of the ways that we can imitate God is to procreate ourselves. Okay, that's a really interesting sort of concept from one way of understanding it. But the other element of it is that actually the process of bringing the world into being in a relationship is something that is celebrated. It's a celebration. There is joy in the moment. It could be a very awesome and sometimes terrible responsibility to say that I'm only going to be like God if I have a kid. Okay, that's really hard because there are many people who want and can't, and there are many people who do want and shouldn't feel that, and for all of that, right? That, but that's a beautiful interpretation, and also the sense of that we can all be participants in creation in some way. That's a really powerful message for us to hold on to. Last piece, yichud. I'm gonna bring it. It's a little like, remember that yichud is supposed to be intimacy, right? So how is yichud like your relationship with God? We're all over 40 here, which means that we can study the mystical traditions, and the mystical traditions spend a lot of time dealing with this. Clearly, it's about having union with the divine. Now, what an interesting concept. It's not just simply that like finding another human being is about like participating in your relationship with God. That's nice, right? But it's about being in union with the divine the best way that you know how, which is to be in union with another human being. Imagine the power of your relationship reaching that level, the level of respect that is expressed between the two of you, the level of commitment that's expressed between the two of you, the level of responsibility that's carried between the two of you, the sort of promise of creation and partnership that happens between the two of you. I don't know if we really know what it means to unify with the divine, but this seems to be a very good attempt at defining what the divine is. So what we have seen in our learning so far is that we've moved from birth and education and learning. The culmination of our learning is this moment in which we can say we have the capacity and the desire to be in relationship with the divine, and the best way we know how to do that is to be in relationship with the other human being. Okay. So Sukasa asks in the chat, she says, is yichud something like communion in the Catholic tradition? It is and it's not. And I'm not a super expert in communion, but I do understand communion is about trying to manifest God within you, right? So yichud is kind of like a manifestation of godliness, but with another human being. So in that sense, I think it's a beautiful parallel that we could speak about. I think that you'll hear Judaism say, you know what, our trajectory is much more humanistic, if you will, right? Like we understand that there's something greater than ourselves, but the thing that we can know for sure, right, that we can concretely identify with is a relationship with another human being. That's where I think there might be a little bit of the distinction, right? And I appreciate it. I celebrate it and respect that Catholicism has it the way that it has it. I'm obviously not one who is going to partake in communion because I'm not sure that it's a fulfillment of my own religious identity. But I do tell you that fulfillment of my own religious identity is going to be in relationship with other people. And if I'm so privileged to be in relationship with one other human being, by the way, one other human being, right? It's not that I have a lot of love for a lot of people, one other human being this way, because there's only one other God, people. Now, one last thing to kind of chew on as I'm just sort of like cogitating on that. So Judaism has built into the system a recognition that relationships aren't always perfect, and that there's sometimes a need to sort of like separate relationships and create new relationships. And the fact that it's there, does that imply that maybe we are also we need permission to create new relationships with God as well? What does that look like to live our lives as if we could create new relationships with God? Does it mean that there's many gods? On the contrary, I think it's the exact opposite. I think it says that, just like Marlene brought up, I wish I had a ketubah for when I was, when it was a little bit later on, when I had a few more years underneath my belt, right? That the idea that just as we mature with our understandings and our relationship with each other, so too do we mature in our understandings of our relationship with God. Now, do you have to divorce God? I'm going to be really, really, you would shake your head and I would say, you have to divorce from that relationship, right? Because if it doesn't work for you, you need to create a new relationship. So I'd be very interested in the sort of thinking about, can we make a ketubah commitment with, what does it mean to make ketubah commitments with God? And certainly it's about following the Torah, okay? It's following the obligations and responsibilities. But you'll also hear in the words of the prophets that the prophet uses a language of a jilted lover, of a jilted spouse, and that God is like that. And the problem is that there's such imbalance in the relationship because God's power is so far beyond the power of the human being that what comes to be a discovery is actually that there wasn't equivalence in the relationship as was originally intended. So I would love to hold on to that. Sort of something to think about as we move forward. Sue added, yes, community is about bringing the body of Christ to you, right? And I would say, I think it's beautiful, right? Again, it's another distinction between Judaism and Christianity, is that Christianity is going to have very much a connection to Jesus as the sort of, a manifestation of God, and our relationship with Jesus is the sort of like, it is the conduit to our relationship with God. I think that's one of the understandings of what Christianity has to say. And it also has Jesus as an end in of itself or himself, and that as long as you're in a relationship with Jesus, then you are in a relationship with God. Those are just different ways, variations of the very same conversation that we're having. Judaism is very much about our relationships with other people. Okay, well, we have reached the conclusion of our class this week. I'm looking forward to next week when we're going to talk about the many varieties of how ceremonies are practiced and what is the rationale, and how do we take this concept and bring it into the 21st century. What does it look like for us to be participating in rituals that carry this ancient idea forward? That's what we're going to be holding on to. Okay, so I wish you all a very, very good week. Thank you for learning with me. We'll do it one more time to make sure all of the right links are in the right place, and hopefully everybody will get there without any difficulty. Okay, take care.